And with that, we'll get started. I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Randy Gordon is the Program Manager with the Arbor Day Foundation. Randy works primarily with the Tree City USA and Tree Line USA programs, and the Partners in Community Forestry Program and Conference. He has 20 years experience in education, training, and facilitation. Following Randy will be Meredith Perkins, the Urban and Community Forestry Coordinator for the Utah Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. She is also working with USU Extension to cover urban forestry needs. Meredith works with professional arborists, municipal foresters, and partners to promote best management of our state's urban forest resources.
Okay. Like Rose said, my name's Randy Gordon. I'm with the Arbor Day Foundation here in Lincoln, Nebraska. And Meredith invited me to visit just a little bit about the impact that tree planting programs, initiatives, and projects are having both on the national, regional, and local levels. And then I think Meredith is going to pick it up from there, and she has some very state-specific items that she's going to cover. But I wanted to start off by talking about high impact, because at the Arbor Day Foundation, we really kind of think about impact as those ripples and waves. And some of you may be familiar with the story of the boy who, while out playing at a lake, picks up a rock and throws it as hard as he can. That lands in the lake and makes a huge splash. And as he watches, the ripples continue to travel across the lake, far out of sight, and some hit the shore and then bounce back into the lake. So we're looking at impact kind of like that, and this model is just one way that we try to illustrate the impact that we all can have across urban and community forestry programs, projects, and initiatives with the impact that we have in our day-to-day activities. The input is obviously we spend a lot of time planning. We pick up a lot of rocks. We make a lot of decisions about, I think we should do this, I think we need to publicize that, or educate people more about this. Then we launch into our action. We're busy doing lots of things. We throw a lot of rocks into the lake, and a lot of those outcomes are big splashes. Things like planting events, things like initiatives that garner lots of media attention, get a lot of trees in the ground. But the impact is those ripples. The impact really bounces across people that we didn't realize that we were going to touch. So that's just one way to think about the impact that we can all have, whether you're a municipal arborist, a municipal forester, you're a master gardener, you work with youth. Those ripples are the key to our work. And so we're going to talk a little bit today about how trees can be the answer to lots and lots of things. We hear it all the time, and I listed some things here. Trees can be the answer or provide some support to these kinds of issues. Things like energy demand, that's pretty common sense, I think. Food scarcity, we're starting to see more and more urban orchard projects and things like that appear. Climate change, obviously there's great discussion going on about the role that trees can play in climate change. Obviously deforestation, the best way to address that would be to plant trees and replant those areas that are devastated by man-made activities or insects, fire, things like that. Air and water quality and poverty, all things that trees can provide some answers for. And I think we're all uniquely positioned in our different roles to do some of these things, to engage in activities and in partnerships that are going to help bring about change and progress towards these many issues. We all know that trees pay us back. Trees pay us back in our stormwater costs, property values, economic development, all those things, and that's pretty well documented. I think iTree has done a great job of providing that information in a public way, so that we can all take a look at the impact that some of our tree planting activities and some of our urban forest activities can have in a community or a state or even across the country. But we don't really know what we have until we do some of the hard work. And I know that state forestry agencies, extension groups, lots and lots of different bodies and entities are working to help communities, whether it's a large city, small town, figure out what they actually have. How many trees do they have? What's the condition of those trees? Are there lots of threats? Are we looking at a declining canopy in an older community? Diversity is becoming a really hot topic, I think, in lots of areas. What kind of a canopy cover do we have? What kind of a canopy cover are we looking to address into the future and work towards? And then finally, what are those benefits that we're seeing as a community from all the tree planting and the proper tree care and maintenance that we've had over the many years? So the opportunities that arise after we've done some of that work, we've taken a look at what the assessment, what the inventory reveals. We can do things. We can address better tree care. We can take a look at management plans, education. Is it private property trees that we really need to address in whatever role we function in? We can take a look at the planting space that's available. Is it residential planting space? Is it open space? Are there development opportunities that tree planting presents? Then we need to also take a look at what kind of strategic planning are we putting in at the community level, whether it's a zoning issue, whether it's new residential development, commercial development, or is it even regional as communities grow together, as things like light rail and new highways, new utility corridors come in. We need to start looking at the opportunities that those provide for us to put trees in the ground and really help people understand the value of trees. We can't do that without partnerships, though. Once we figure out what we have, where we're headed, we need to start looking at who else can help us get there, and how can we help other partners get there as well. We can address lots of specific needs once we have that information. I know that iTree data and canopy studies and assessments and inventories can reveal where those high-need neighborhoods are. If we're looking to help shade a community and reduce that heat island effect, we can take a look at which neighborhoods are the ones that really do need trees and real focus. We can take a look at other food sources. We're starting to see more and more with urban orchards. We're starting to see more efforts go into community gardening, lots and lots of opportunities, and again, it can't happen without partnerships. Obviously, shade is key in there, and if you're living anywhere in the West where sometimes trees live a harsh life and struggle to make it, then we really value the shade that a lot of those trees provide. And also revitalization, economic development, taking a look at declining neighborhoods, taking a look at business areas that can benefit from urban greening and trees. All those things are opportunities that will present themselves. But we have to be strategic. We can't just go out and say, hey, we've got real issues in our community, let's just start putting trees in the ground. We've got to figure out where the spacing goes. We've got to figure out what kind of species we really ought to be working on. We need to partner with those researchers and those leaders at the state level, the university level, those people who have grand experience in helping us decide what trees have we already overplanted and where do we need to start cutting back and looking at diversity. We also need to look at growing conditions, and I think anyone who works with trees in the western half of the United States understands that growing conditions can be a real challenge. So at the Arbor Day Foundation, we've looked at many programs. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the Tree City USA program, the Tree Line USA program. We've recently started piloting a new program and are now rolling it out this fall and next spring in a much larger way. The Energy Saving Trees program is a program designed to encourage utilities to fund private property tree planting. Now, this is a national program, an example of years and years of research and work. We looked at tree planting models and utility shade programs from across the country, and there were many, but very few of them were highly successful or had much longevity. But of course, we're always interested in learning more. We weren't able to find all of the utility-funded tree planting programs for shade, but what we did find, we were able to take and model several different variations so that we could put together a national tree planting program, Energy Saving Trees, that allows utility companies to encourage their customers to plant trees funded by the utility on the west side of the house, the south side of the house, to provide shade and shelter during harsh weather conditions. In a nutshell, what a customer is able to do is log on to a tool that's really powered by iTree and the information in iTree. And we've been working with Davey this project and program for the last several years. But what it allows a customer to do is find their home on Google Maps and really map their home, which automatically overlays what you see on the screen, which is a spider web of desirable tree planting locations based on the alignment of their home. And the customer is then able to go in, select trees that the State Forestry Agency and the utility have worked together to develop a list of desirable trees to be planted for shade. And it lets the customer experiment with, if I put a tree here on this side or a tree on that side, what am I going to see in energy savings over the course of a year? What am I going to see in terms of stormwater? And all that information is generated at the very bottom of the screen that you see there. So you can move the tree around, you can experiment with different trees, and once a customer decides that that's the tree they want, they basically check out, and a tree is either mailed to them or a tree is available for them to pick up courtesy of their local utility company. And like I said, we've been piloting this program for the last several planting seasons, experimenting with large utilities and small utilities, different models where a tree is mailed to their home, like a bare root tree, or a tree is picked up at a location that's then staffed by utility employees, maybe nonprofit tree planting groups, maybe state forestry agencies, and others who work together to ensure that these trees are planted properly. Ultimately, it does come down to homeowners planting trees for their own energy savings, and we're seeing great success so far, but again, this is a program that's just now moving forward. As part of that, there is a national strategic tree planting initiative that the U.S. Forest Service is working with the Arbor Day Foundation to implement. Basically, what that's going to do is allow a participating utility company and those others who work in that service area, or those other groups like nonprofit tree planting groups, conservation groups, education groups, who can come together and form a coalition to really help encourage customers to take advantage of the trees that are available. And those coalitions, there will be a process, a grant process, where those coalitions can come together, decide on a strategy to help encourage customers to take advantage of those trees and really capitalize on what utility companies are providing to their service area customers, and try to get as many trees as possible planted properly so that their customers can benefit from that. And like I said, this initiative is new. It's something that's going to be rolling out in the very near future, and you'll be able to hear more about it through the Arbor Day Foundation, through Meredith, and lots of other places. So I look forward to telling you more about that in the future. Another example of a national initiative is the Tree Campus USA program, which is again another fairly new program that we've launched into here at the Arbor Day Foundation. It's coming up on its 5th year of existence, and basically the Tree Campus USA program is a high-impact program because it does several things. It engages really the next generation of tree stewards. It engages college students in caring about trees on their campus, not directly through tree care, but through planting, through service learning, through participation in their campus tree care advisory board, and really is just a way to help people understand that college campuses are sometimes the greenest communities in an area, and the care that goes into to planting trees and caring for trees on those campuses is monumental, and there's a real opportunity there to engage students and help them recognize that the trees that have made their college experience what it is don't just happen by accident. It takes a lot of care. It takes continued planting, and so that program is just another example of how we're looking at big impact. We're looking at those ripples. We're trying to really encourage people when they leave school to become actively involved in organizations, whether they're tree planting or conservation or education, for the benefit of urban forestry. I listed several here, several other national and regional initiatives and campaigns that really are designed to help educate people about the value that trees can bring in a variety of ways. The first I listed there is the Intertwine Project in Oregon. The Intertwine Project is basically a regional planning tool. The Portland area is surrounded by many counties that are all part of one governmental unit, and all of the planning around transportation and green space and trails all works through one central governmental body, so that you don't have one community that's trying to plan for transportation needs while the community next door is trying to plan for green space without any connectivity between the two. It's just one example, and it's a grand example because they have the governmental body in place to make this work, but it's an example of how communities can get together and really work towards the broader issue of planting trees and planning for the future. In Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society is the leader of a Plant 1 Million campaign, but it's not just plant 1 million trees in the city of Philadelphia. It's a regional initiative. It reaches across the river into Delaware, New Jersey, and those organizations are collaborating to make sure that they're planting 1 million trees in the area, especially in high-need urban areas. And those of you who've been to Philadelphia or Camden, New Jersey, or Wilmington, Delaware, can really see that as in older neighborhoods, especially in the Northeast, there's lots of canopy loss. And so the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, in partnership with many others, are working together as a group to get 1 million trees into the ground in that area. In California, Sacramento, the Green Print Initiative is another example of how regionally communities are working together to take a look at what is happening with urban forestry, what's happening with tree planting, and trying to find ways to work better together to get more trees planted, to continue to grow the canopy in the Sacramento Valley. And then the last example I have here is just a more local example. In Fayetteville, Arkansas, the trail system in Fayetteville, which is vast and connects the university to the neighborhoods to commercial areas, and a big part of the success of that trail network is that the forestry department works in collaboration with the trail network to make sure that areas that are more exposed and areas that are baking in the summer sun get those high priority trees to shade the trail. And what they're finding is that there's significantly more use on those trail areas where people are enjoying shade, and those areas where trees are being preserved and cared for so that they have a long life along the trail, but also making sure that they're replanting along the way. So that's just a real quick summary of some things that are happening across the country, things that are happening at the Arbor Day Foundation. But again, it all goes back to the impact that we hope to have. At the Arbor Day Foundation, we operate several programs in partnership with lots and lots of other groups, organizations, and partners, and not all of those programs have always been high impact. We've done away with some programs over the years that were not as high impact as we had hoped, and we're now moving forward with some new things, hoping to address those issues like energy demand, hoping to address issues around helping to tell the story of urban forestry and really engage people in tree planting so that we really are preparing the next generation of urban forest advocates.
Thank you so much, Randy, for being a part of this webinar. It's always great to have national partners coming into our local webinars and education just to kind of bring that perspective. We're really lucky in Utah to have Arbor Day Foundation as an industry partner. We're really excited to work with Randy and his team on Tree City USA, and now hopefully broaden that into some other aspects of energy saving trees and other things. So again, thanks so much, Randy, for being a part of this, and I encourage you all to think of some questions that you might have for Randy while we have his ear here. But back to strategic tree planting, I did want to kind of take what Randy talked about on the national level and boil it down into a few local examples on how folks are utilizing trees. I did notice in the chat pod that we've got a lot of non-locals, folks as far away as Nebraska and Idaho and Wyoming. So hopefully you find this interesting, and I'm sure our contacts are willing to work with you as well as our Utah neighbors. Okay, if you walk away with anything from this presentation, I hope that you can take these key messages, and Randy mentioned a few of these in his presentation as well. But trees pay us back. It's a really easy slogan to remember, and when we're talking about strategically planting trees, using that makes sense to people. Oh, we're making an investment in trees and they're going to pay us back. The other one is that trees are an investment. We often have upfront costs, but if we can start educating people and explaining that over the long run, these trees are really going to have a much larger impact than, say, the couple $100 it takes to purchase and plant them and the maintenance fees associated with that. Planting trees strategically will help solve long-term issues and still offer instant gratification. We're going to talk about the strategy behind tree planting, but I think often enough, people just want to plant trees, and that's okay too. The idea that just planting trees for that instant gratification and the beautification and the aesthetic, that's enough sometimes in certain situations. And then small steps in the right direction can lead to bigger things. Randy also alluded to this a little bit in his presentation, but we don't have to be part of a massive national movement. We don't have to be, planting hundreds or millions of trees in our communities to make a difference. And every small bit that a local Boy Scout troop or extension agent or group of individuals or municipality can take is a step in the right direction. And I think doing these types of things where we can start working together on a few initiatives, we can even have a bigger impact. So every little bit counts. Strategic tree planting is really a new twist on the right tree in the right place. That slogan was developed initially because of the utility companies wanting people to look up and plant trees that would not impact the utility lines, obviously. But I think it started to evolve into thinking about what specific species are going to be appropriate for what places to maximize all kinds of benefits, not just minimizing utility conflicts. Okay, I put this slide in here, assuming we have gotten over the planting hurdle, because I wanted to just point out that no tree in the right place is going to pay us back if we don't give it a chance to survive. There's a lot of great resources out there for tree planting specifications. The USU Extension website there at the bottom of the slide is probably a really great place, especially for local Utah folks, to find some good tree planting specifications for our area. But the trees need to be able to thrive in the landscape in order for them to provide all the benefits that Randy talked about and that I'm going to kind of go into here in the rest of the program. So be sure that you get that under control, whether it's with your staff, yourself, your volunteers. And then once you know that the trees are going to grow where you plant them, the next step is to think about what do you want these trees to do and where should we put them strategically in order for them to start providing those benefits that we want. I think now's a really good time to start thinking about this too, because I know a lot of you are preparing to think about what the spring Arbor Day celebrations are going to be, where you're going to be doing your tree planting. So hopefully this is timing properly through the winter so you can get your ducks in a row. There's a lot of great examples of strategic tree planting in Utah. It's hard to hear, I think, a lot of the great ideas across the country and make them relevant to what's going on in your own backyard. So I wanted to showcase a few exciting projects that are happening right now. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, but hopefully give you some resources that you can follow up if you're interested in emulating some of these projects. In this particular picture, it could be any number of places in Utah, broad sweeping London plane trees across a road corridor. This happens to be a road that I get to pass back and forth on my way to and from work in my own neighborhood. These street trees were likely planted for shade and aesthetic. They define the space and provide kind of a comfort for the residents there. And like I said earlier, that really sometimes is enough of a benefit to justify a tree planting, because in addition to the aesthetic and the objective achieved by these beautiful stately trees in Salt Lake City, they are also providing added value, these ecosystem services, which is a buzzword that you may have already heard a lot of, and you probably will more, but this idea that trees give us back wildlife habitat, they clean our air, they shade our cities. They're changing the ambient cooling right there. You can tell all of the shading there on the street, extending the life of the concrete. And really, probably my favorite benefit of these trees in this particular situation is the increased neighborhood property value that I am enjoying from those trees. Thanks, Julie Fratto. I think you're on here today, taking care of those good trees. Okay, but let's get down to some target issues. Randy talked a lot about energy, trees for energy. It's a really hot topic right now across the country, and you can tell because the Arbor Day Foundation is dealing with this particular topic. They tend to stay on top of the curve on this sort of stuff, so if they're taking on some initiatives and projects based on trees and energy, we can tell that it's something that's going to really be moving across the country. And it makes sense. We want to save energy, we want to save money, we want to save the planet. Why can't we just do all of that by planting trees, right? This type of brochure is just half of one brochure that I could get into the PowerPoint, but it's a really simple way to explain the concepts to residents and citizens about the easy ways to plant for energy conservation. Planting deciduous trees on the southwest corner to shade your home, planting evergreen trees on the north or the down canyon wind sides of your home to reduce the wind in the winter. So this is something that's definitely growing in the country, and luckily here in Utah we've had a municipal utility working on this campaign for the last 17 years. Anybody have a good guess? Provo. Provo City has a great Trees for Energy program, and I want to tell you just a little bit about it here. Okay. Because Provo has a local utility, they're vested in energy saving principles. So they do an annual tree giveaway, and people literally line up hours before their giveaway and around the block, as you can see in this photo. They give away 500 trees per year, and like I said, they have a long history, 17 years running. I spoke with Scott Bunker, who's the contact there at the bottom of the page, and when I was asking him about the program, he said really the main benefit is the opportunity to educate the public. You have 500 plus citizens out there taking home a tree, but they're a captive audience to hear that message of where they need to plant that tree, what that tree is going to be giving back. And the city is really investing in the community because these trees are going to be planted on the citizens' property. So similar to that diagram that Randy showed, where it showed strategically where you need to plant those trees to maximize the benefits for energy in your community. That's the message that Provo City has been sharing with their constituents. It's a great PR opportunity. And the only real downfall, I think, to the Provo program is that they don't have a really good tracking system for success. If you do want to consider implementing something like this, I would encourage you to follow up with the tracking so you do have some justification for the resources spent on the front end and can show that it's really making an impact. I would encourage you to consider working with your local utility if you have one to develop these programs. Talk with Scott, he's a great guy. He'd be happy to share his information. Or if you're under the Rocky Mountain Power Service District, encourage them to partner with the Arbor Day Foundation and some of those Energy for Saving Trees programs that Randy talked about. And really, at a minimum, if you're just, a master gardener or someone that has jurisdiction over your own property, start implementing some of these things around your neighbor, your house, and then explaining them to your neighbors and encouraging others to take some baby steps in that direction. All right, Trees for Riparian Areas is something that the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands is really starting to launch into. Trees are a critical part of a healthy riparian system. And in our cities and towns, we have riparian corridors, we have creeks, we have rivers, even we have drainage ditches and irrigation ditches and all of these things that could utilize or could benefit, I guess, from trees. In this photo is near the Redwood Nature Area. It was provided by Tree Utah, and Tree Utah manages this wetland reclamation site. Yes, it's a wetland recreation site that was a mitigation project based on a UTA project that destroyed an original wetland. And so UTA came through and established a new wetland site and worked with Tree Utah to start planting native cottonwoods and willows in this area. And now it's home to a host of bird species and a great opportunity for volunteers to come out and help with the vegetation as well as learn a little bit about wetlands. But there really are a number of projects going on along the Jordan River in Salt Lake County. This wetland is adjacent to the Jordan River in Salt Lake County, and they're starting to really embrace tree planting as part of the river's restoration. I'd like to showcase one more project here for you. This is also in Salt Lake County, and this is a good example of what it takes to re-engineer an existing river corridor. This is along the Jordan River, and a good example of where the slope has been re-engineered to a 3-to-1, and native vegetation, cottonwood, box elder, willow, dogwood, have all been planted within that corridor in a really healthy system. Scott Zeidler, the Wasatch Front Urban Forestry or urban forester for our office, has been working a lot along the Jordan River, and he mentioned that you typically need to work with engineers and planners when developing riparian restoration areas. You can't just go in and plant trees and expect them to do their thing or even to survive. That they really need to be, in a lot of these cases, the soils need to be reworked, the river channel needs to be reworked, there needs to be a lot of engineering that goes into that, and then the trees are kind of the icing on the cake. So yeah, trees are part of this larger project that takes a lot of different expertise to accomplish. I also wanted to point out that tree planting often dovetails invasive species removals. Unfortunately, not all urban tree canopy is desirable, and when we're working on riparian areas, we need to go in typically and remove the invasive tamarisk and Russian olive species that are creating a monoculture and outcompeting the native vegetation. Or remove that, start over, and plant that native palette back in so that the ecosystem can really recover and we can get the diversity that's needed to promote the wildlife and a lot of the other ecological benefits of trees and a riparian system. There's a lot of diverse funding for these types of projects because it's not just a landscape tree planting project. Oftentimes there are big dollars associated with riparian restoration area projects because of the money that it takes to do some of those big engineering aspects. And so coming in as a tree expert or a volunteer group or whoever focusing on the tree aspect, you may be able to tie into some of those funds and resources from, say, a community bond or an EPA grant or something else that isn't typically on our radar as foresters and arborists. And kind of following into that same vein, the wetland mitigation opportunities are available. Similar, or as in that slide that I showed previously, UTA had an obligation to create a new wetland, and they have funds set aside for that type of thing. And so we can then maximize on that and come in as kind of the tree saviors that can help really implement the proper practices and get strategically those trees in the right places so they're going to maximize wildlife benefit, water quality, so forth. All right, another big issue in Utah in particular, but really across the country, is air quality. This is a picture outside of my QB window last February. It's gorgeous. This same picture was 3 days later when the inversion settled into the valley. We are constantly struggling with this air quality issue, and I am not here to say that trees are going to solve the problem for air quality, but they can play a small role in being part of the solution if used strategically. The primary way to combat poor air quality is really to reduce energy usage, and so that Trees for Energy program that we explained before is probably the #1 way. By reducing our energy, we're reducing the pollution from the power plants and creating that system impacting that system where it starts. But another way is really to maximize the tree scrubbing capacity for removing particulates and pollutants out of the atmosphere. Okay. West Valley City just recently was awarded a community forestry partnership grant to strategically plant some trees in this highway interchange here within their city. It's an attempt to buffer some of the vehicle pollution coming off of the highway, and an added bonus to this project is that the trees that they're going to be planting will also serve as a sound buffer to the neighboring business district there. Right. Darren Nurdin, the contact there at the bottom, is the city forester for West Valley City and the author of this particular grant. He's prioritizing evergreens because of their year-round benefits. They don't lose their leaves, so those leaves are constantly collecting particulates and scrubbing out some of the pollutants coming off of the car emissions. They partnered with UDOT. It's great to partner with bigger projects to be able to, for the maintenance, for the access to these areas, and possibly some funding as well. And then Darren was really adamant that they were going to be utilizing volunteers, and probably in all of these different projects, utilizing volunteers is one of the most critical aspects, because not only do you get work done on the ground and get a lot of bodies digging holes, but you also have that captive audience that's going to listen to your message and be able to then spread the word about what these trees are doing, what trees can do for the environment, what trees can do to pay us back in all sorts of ways. So it's critical to get volunteers out there. For more detailed information on the impact of trees and air quality, I encourage you to read a publication called Interior West Community Tree Guide, Benefits, Costs, and Strategic Planting. It's put out by the Pacific Southwest Forest Research Station, and if you do an internet search for Interior West Community Tree Guide, you should be able to bring that up. But it will give you a lot more specifics on the species to choose, how you want to implement it, what the real impact is going to be, and help you through the project design on this type of effort. Okay, trees for food production. Randy talked a little bit about how this is a growing trend across the country, and Utah really does have a rich history with food production and orchard growing, but I think we're starting to lose a little bit of touch with it. If you think strategically, there's a time and a place for fruit trees, but along the parking strip, say, on a street, is probably not the best one. The city of Moab, down in southern Utah, was able to find that perfect combination of a winning location and a really supportive community wanting to embrace a community orchard. Back in 2009, Moab received a community forestry partnership grant from the state to plant 12 fruit trees as part of a youth garden project. And, excuse me, they created the Dixie Park Orchard. The city partnered with the elementary school, they partnered with local businesses, they had a corporate sponsor, and they turned this sort of underutilized corner of the city into a productive and beautiful corner park. It generated a lot of community interest, and it also served as an education key point for students to learn a little bit about where their food came from. And really my favorite part about this project is that eventually the same kids that are helping plant and learn about fruit trees will be able to harvest the fruit from this orchard and sell it at their local farmers market to produce more money to plant more trees and more garden space in the long haul. And David Olson, the city forester in Moab, his email there in the corner, has it on good authority that by next spring, 2013, the fruit will be mature enough that they'll be able to have their first real harvest and sale at the farmers market. A few benefits to urban tree orchards are that it promotes community bonding. It's not just a tree planting event and everyone walks away from it. The community is engaged and involved in the maintenance and the harvest of these trees for the long term. Again, it engages volunteer support. It takes abandoned lots and turns them into something that really does work for the community. This is something I see in a lot of examples across the country with abandoned or vacant lots. Being able to reclaim that as an urban orchard is really powerful. And then finally, maybe in the case of the Moab Youth Project, be able to bring in a little bit of revenue to sustain that project. If you're interested in implementing something like this, feel free to contact David down in Moab. I'm sure he'd be happy to share his success with you. Also, Tree Utah has a demonstration permaculture garden at the Day Riverside Library here in Salt Lake City. They have fruit trees and nut trees. They do pruning demonstrations and tours, so contact Tree Utah also for information on food production and trees for orchards. All right, trees for business districts. From the specialized light standards to maybe the building codes and stamped concrete, parking lot layouts, all of those things, it's pretty obvious that business districts are strategic in their planning, and trees should really be no exception to this rule. Ogden City has a very successful business district along 25th Street and has really overcome a lot of challenges related to its trees over the long term. The city forester, Monty Stewart, his email down there in the corner, he'll tell you that the trees are a real hassle. He had a whole litany of maintenance challenges when I talked with him last week about this project. But he did say it was worth the headache because of the impact of the overall environment. Though shop owners often express concerns about trees blocking visibility, signage, so forth, through education and then also strategic tree planting and proper maintenance, everyone can kind of meet in the middle and see the benefit. Okay, the trees really do create a welcoming atmosphere for shoppers. There's a lot of research out, and I encourage you to look into this for more ammunition about trees in business districts. Kathy Wolf has done a lot of research with the University of Washington on how just having trees along a business district encourage people to come and shop and spend more money. So it's worth it economically to have those trees there, though maintenance is a challenge in these areas. And Monty will be the first to tell you all about them. But whether it's Christmas lights, which I know a lot of you have been dealing with the last couple of months, or it's just pruning, or it's the leaf cleanup, or it's the challenges with the tree wells, we really do have to overcome a lot when we're talking about trees in business districts. It's critical to think strategically about what species to select if you have the luxury of selecting new species to be planted. Also to keep in mind the soil limitations and the growth expectations. Oftentimes in small spaces we want to plant small trees, but in business district situations, those trees need to be high enough that can be limbed up for clearance and for delivery trucks as well as sign visibility. So it's important in these high visible areas, highly trafficked areas, that we really pay attention as tree people on making sure that we get a tree that's going to work for that situation. And unfortunately in business districts, we put a lot of demand on those trees. They have to do all of these things and live in very constricted places and then also look very beautiful all year round. Okay. All right, partnerships. Randy mentioned a lot about this, I think, in every slide that he went through. He said, and of course we need partnerships, and of course we need partnerships. And I know this isn't anything new to anyone, but especially when we start moving outside the box in what we're trying to do as tree stewards, tree planting projects, when we're encroaching into some realms that are a little bit under-discovered, it's important to have some people on our side, partners that can help us along, either technically, financially, or just kind of showing us the ropes. Little teaser I want to throw out here is our Lieutenant Governor Bell is expected to announce a big tree planting initiative coming up this spring 2013. His interest is primarily in planting trees for reducing or for improving air quality issues. And so I'll be working with Governor Bell, or Lieutenant Governor Bell, and Tree Utah, and many of you, hopefully, in developing this planting initiative with him, and hopefully encouraging a lot more swell of interest in planting trees for this particular issue. I think it's important that we look into agency and nonprofit partnerships with similar goals. Again, when we think outside the box and we're looking at non-traditional issues, it just makes sense to start reaching out to non-traditional partners. If we want a Trees for Air Quality planting project, why not engage the Mothers for Clean Air? Or if we want a fruit tree orchard, why not engage the Youth Gardening Project? Or if we're doing a restoration project along a major urban corridor, let's get the EPA involved, or let's get the National Park System Trails folks involved. There's a lot of different people that might have a lot of money and good ideas that could partner with us and make our projects better. Volunteers, again, this is something that I'll just drive home. Sometimes I know it's really challenging to work with volunteers, especially in tree planting projects. You have to have a lot of oversight and you have to have a lot of patience. But those folks that you have invested in will bring your message, and they'll be the tree stewards, and kind of like Randy pointed out, kind of provide some of those ripples in the pond and hopefully spread the good news. Getting the public works and the engineering departments on board with the projects, I think, are also key projects that sometimes as foresters, arborists, we overlook. But having those kind of heavy hitters on our side and bringing them to the table at some of our smaller projects and showing that we have credibility, that, you know, hey, this tree thing, there's something to it, maybe then eventually establishing a relationship with those folks will get you to the table at some of their bigger projects, and can incorporate trees into projects that may not have had that component or had that trees component really well thought out. And finally, the local and regional planning. Randy mentioned this too, I think in Arkansas or Pennsylvania or somewhere in one of his examples, but I had the pleasure of working with the Wasatch Front Regional Council on a big green infrastructure plan for the area, and I was amazed at what a regional council deals with, and they were mapping out open space and trails and parks and all kinds of different environmental amenities, and urban forestry is a huge part of that. Now that plan is in place, and so if we can start looking at that plan as well as other green infrastructure plans or just regional planning efforts and tie what we want to do into what the region has already said is a priority, all of a sudden we have a lot more interest and potential for our projects. Okay, this is the other big question on everyone's minds. I know everyone thinks, yeah, great, Meredith, we like to do it, but where's the money? So my last slide here, I just wanted to go over a few grant opportunities. The Community Forestry Partnership Grant is available through the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, and it's one that many of my examples were funded under. We raised the grant amount to $8,000 this year and may even consider raising it more depending on the projects that we start to see. But it's really focused on tree management, urban forestry development across the state at a municipal level, and having a justification for the tree planting is really compelling in this competitive grant process. Those grants are available, they'll be available next summer, 2013. The competitive redesign grant is something that we haven't talked a lot about here in Utah. Many of you maybe in other states have worked with your state and federal partners on these grants, but we do have a number of these projects going on. Many of the riparian restoration projects that I spoke about and that are going on across the state are funded with this competitive redesign grant. It's a Forest Service grant that's administered through the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, but it's up to $300,000 for restoration work. We just recently got one for the Ogden River, and we've been working with the Jordan and the Virgin and the Colorado, all with help from this particular grant. So if you've got a good idea on something that we might be able to incorporate in one of these redesign grants in the future, please contact me and let me know. The Alliance for Community Trees Neighborhoods Grants, ACT, is a great small grant program for nonprofits, organizations that want to do a startup tree planting, or maybe just get some marketing material for a tree planting project to let everybody know, hey, we're doing this and we're doing it for a reason. They have great programs. You have to be a member of AC Trees in order to qualify for these grants, but I think it's a very small fee. A great project that was funded with this grant was up in Park City as part of their community garden. I think at least a dozen trees were planted to shade the perimeter of the garden through that Neighborhoods grant. And then finally, Tree Utah Planting Grant. Tree Utah is a great resource here in the state. It's our local tree planting nonprofit, and these grants are available twice a year in the spring and the fall. The application and everything is online, so you can just go there, fill out the information, and the real beauty in this particular grant is that you can not only get trees paid for, but also get the expertise and the volunteer coordination of the incredible Tree Utah staff. So it's a real win-win. And I think with that, I will say there are a lot of other grant resources, and if you start thinking creatively and thinking strategically, you will stumble upon a number of other potential funding sites. It just takes a little head scratching to get there. And I'm always willing to brainstorm with any of you if you're interested in particular projects or funding sources. And I think with that, we can take a few questions. That's my contact information there up in the upper left-hand corner. Please feel free to get a hold of me if you have follow-up questions or want to know more about any of those particular projects. I'd be happy to point you in the right direction. And again, feel free to contact those foresters and folks that I put down there as good contacts as well. Do we have questions in the chat pad? I've been chatting on, and I'm not sure. I'm going to turn the time over to Rose.
All right, thanks, Meredith. We do have a couple of questions, and we'll start out with a question for Randy. This is from Andrew. Andrew says, Randy, I am really curious about how trees aid in the reduction of crime. Can you speak a little more about how trees assist in the reduction of crime?
Microphone on.
Randy.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
I'm here. I know that there have been very few actual studies that really delved into how trees resulted in reduction in crime. I know that the one that's referenced most often is out of Chicago, and it was in a housing project area. But anecdotally, I've heard other stories about how trees aid in the reduction of crime. I think the biggest reasons are that neighborhoods that have trees, whether they're just well cared for mature trees or newly planted trees that are watered and mulched and cared for, show people that the neighborhood cares about what's going on outside. So that's one anecdotal way I think that trees aid in the reduction of crime. I've also heard from more like police chief folks and officers that areas that are treed, while the perception is that it provides people places to hide, it actually does basically the same kind of a thing. Shady areas are places where people will gather, so it's not like I'm thinking more like in the evening and things like that. I think shady areas provide places where people can get together, places like parks where people are more inclined to spend more time when there's a great canopy and the trees are well cared for. So it's really more of a social dynamic. And again, I know that I think it was Sullivan and Kuo, K-U-O, are the two people that did the key work on that research. But that's probably, what, 8-year-old research as far as I know.
Yeah, at this point, here's another question for Randy. This is from Eric. Eric says, can you provide more information on the format for grants in terms of rough timeline, match, in-kind, and selection criteria?
Yeah, I can actually. The Strategic Tree Planting Initiative, and that was the program where groups can bond together and create a coalition or a consortium that wants to help encourage it can really do two things: encourage their utility to get involved in the Energy Saving Trees program and fund those trees that go to their customers, or work with a utility that's already participating and really help develop a strategy and education component. Those are really the two ways that groups can get involved. Now the timeline is that we hope to offer some of those grants this spring. So that would mean that in January, more likely February, criteria and the timelines will be announced and released. Now right now we don't have utilities from coast to coast participating in energy saving trees. We have pockets all over the country, so it's kind of a matter of anybody who's thinking this is the kind of thing that we want to promote as an organization, Trees for Shade, and get our utility involved in that, then they should by all means start that conversation or contact me, and there are some others here at the Arbor Day Foundation who'd be more than happy to walk you through some of those steps.
Great, thanks Randy. And we'll do one question. This one will be for Meredith. From Andy, he says, what size are the trees that Provo is giving away?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure what the size of those trees are. I did get some pictures from Scott Bunker, and it looked like they're maybe 1.5 inch potted trees, so they're significant trees. They're not seedlings, but I don't think that they are giant ball and burlap. One of the biggest challenges when you do a tree giveaway is to make sure that the trees are big enough that they seem substantial and can survive in the landscape, but small enough that somebody can throw it in the back of a minivan and not have to haul it with a big truck or throw their back out. So I'm pretty sure they were about 1.5 inches potted trees.
Okay, and here's one more question. This is from Joanna, and she says to either speaker, what would you say the biggest challenges to urban tree planting seem to be?
Wow, well,
I can.
I'll take a quick. Go ahead, Randy. You go first.
Okay, I think there are a couple of challenges. I think tree mortality, just the fact that urban trees have to deal with so much in terms of reduced budgets. Fewer trees are being planted in many communities. Tree care is being cut in many communities. Sometimes the responsibility for trees is being passed over to the adjacent homeowner. Sometimes homeowners are responsible for planting street trees in their neighborhoods. So I think that trees are fighting a good fight right now, but I think perhaps even a bigger obstacle for urban trees revolves around design and planning. I think that new neighborhoods can be better developed with trees in mind. I think green space and parks, we have lots of examples where those neighborhoods really are developed around green space, parks, and transportation, and trees play a significant role in that. I think that's really going to be the future, and I think that infill is another component. You look at very urban communities where neighborhoods go through transition, and as the mature trees die and people move out, there's a real desire to get trees back in so that it becomes a more desirable area to redevelop, to revitalize, to bring business in. So that would be my answer, and I'll mute my microphone so Meredith can talk.
I think I'd really agree with Randy in a lot of those scenarios. Trees have often been an afterthought when we're talking about planning, and you have the classic $100 tree in a couple $1,000 hole with the tree grates and all of the different things that go around the tree, and then we think we can just put a tree in the ground. So the planning aspect, and so I think the challenge of planning for trees on the front end versus kind of just throwing some trees in the ground and hoping that they grow is really something that we're working on. And then I think another challenge is just making sure that the right trees are planted the right way. When we look at trees in the landscape, so often the failure here in Utah is because they just weren't established in the landscape correctly. And so if we can plant the trees correctly and then plant them in a medium and in an area that they can not only survive but thrive, I think we're really going to see a lot better results in the long term. And we're really moving in that direction. So it's a challenge, but it's also really an opportunity.
Great. Thank you, Meredith, and thank you, Randy.